how many local and rural ghost stories are based in fact and how many in legend? That's what we're going to discover in this story of Ghosts of the Fen. This is Wicken Fen. The name sounds kind of spooky, doesn't it? As well it might, because many people say that all sorts of nasty things lurk out there on the fen, from ghosts to mythical beasts. And one lady who can tell us some of those stories is waiting now in a cottage just across the way. Let's go meet her.
Before it was drained, in about the 18th century, Soham Mere linked Wicken to Soham. Now this mere was a great, desolate, watery waste where the people, known as the fen slodgers, made a living out of wildfowling. And one of those people, he was Joseph Hempsel, who lived in a cottage perhaps 2 or 3 generations younger than this one. You could call it a God-forsaken place. Joseph Hempsel, he was a young man, he was strong of back, keen of eye, and he had long brown hair. He lived by himself, but that was no problem because every night it was his delight to walk across the mere from Soham to Wicken, to a certain tavern where he would play cards with his friends and drink and make merry. And Joseph Hempsel, he knew that watery wilderness like his mother's face, God rest her soul. And he was at his favourite pub, and the cards had been played, and the beer had been quaffed, and now it was time for Joe to go home. And he opened the door to be confronted by the thickest fog that had been seen in a lifetime. And people begged him, "Don't go, Joe, stay in the pub, or if you have to go, take the green lane back." But Joe would hear none of it, and he was swallowed up in the thick grey blanket, which hung upon the fens for 3 nights. And on the 4th day it lifted as quickly as it came, and one of his mates from Wicken decided to find if Joe had got home safely. And when he got to Joe's cottage, Joe came out. But he was a different fellow. No longer tall and strong, he looked like an old man, and his hair was now white, and it hung every which way. And Joe came to his friend and said, "Enter not my home, for my body lies in Big Bog. Go there and take it and bury it in Wicken churchyard, and remember, as I be now, so one day shall you be." His frightened friend ran back to Wicken, never daring to look at Big Bog, that great bog that stretched across Soham Mere. And he was so frightened, he told his friends, and the friends went out to Big Bog, but they couldn't find Joe Hempsel. It was all a trick, it was all a joke, and they were about to go back to Wicken when another thick fog descended just for a while, and out of the fog stepped Joe Hempsel. And he said to them, "Go to the west side of Big Bog and find there my body and bury it in Wicken churchyard, and remember, as I be now, so one day shall ye all be." And then he disappeared in that strange fog, and his friends went to the west side of Big Bog and found there his body, but they didn't bury it in Wicken churchyard. People who walk the now drained Soham Mere would sometimes hear Joe's voice skirling across the fens, giving the warning, "As I be now, so one day shall ye all be." Walk across Wicken Fen, if you dare, and go along Spinney Bank, and you might see Black Shuck. Black Shuck, the spectral dog. Some people can't bear to speak his name. They call it the hateful thing, or the snarly yow. Black Shuck, he pads along many of the pathways of East Anglia and far beyond. He is a dog, a spectral dog with eyes as big as 2 pints. Sometimes they're red, and sometimes they're yellow, and sometimes they flash red, yellow, red, yellow, and sometimes His one eye is but a cyclops eye in the middle of his forehead, but drop dead terror comes if you see Black Shuck with his one eye hovering where his head should be. And I've met many people who are convinced that they have seen or heard Black Shuck. He's supposed to be one of the dogs of Odin, and Shuck is a corruption of the Saxon word suka, which means devil. But you know, Black Shuck was a very useful bugbear to the free traders or the smugglers who worked along the eastern coast, because they would get a donkey and they would paint it black, and then they would rig up a red lantern over the donkey's head. And so when they were busy smuggling, unsuspecting people walking the coastal path would see this red light hovering over this black beast and immediately think it was Shuck and go away. And they were free to do as they will. And as a writer, I have met many people who are convinced that they've either seen or heard Black Shuck. Black Shuck, the spectral dog. It's usually at that dead, dark time of night.
Well, those were pretty spooky stories. They've got me scared, and you won't catch me out there any time after dark. But we can find out whether there's any real history to those stories. What exactly is the history of this fen? Well, there's one man who can tell us more. Let's go meet him. Well, Mike Rouse is a local writer who knows quite a bit about the fens. It's a pretty inhospitable place, especially at this time of year, and we've heard some pretty spooky stories about the legends. What are the histories of the fen?
You see, now the Vikings raided this area. The Vikings were able to sail their boats right across Soham Mere, right into this waterway system. So you had Vikings perhaps coming ashore with a dog that they brought with them, padding along into the village, and they sacked Soham totally, burnt it to the ground. The early religious settlement of St. Felix, 630, burnt to the ground in 870 by the Vikings. Ely was sacked. So you had this perhaps legend springing up about this dog that came, and with the dog followed death.
As the clouds and the mist are all over the fen, it's easy to understand why people might get just a little spooked being here on their own at night. It is a very eerie place, and we've heard some terrifying tales. I guess in olden times, with not much else to do, people would have sat around the fire and told each other ghost stories. I wonder how many of those stories really were based in fact. Perhaps there are ghosts out there, and perhaps even a beast. Welcome back to the Y-Files. In this part of the show, we meet a couple who run a dancing school, who are convinced they have a ghost with a great sense of rhythm, as you'll discover